You also need to make sure that the spoke tension is appropriate. There are things called spoke tensionometers, which are designed to do just that. They read the tension of the spoke. Generally on rear wheels, the drive side spokes, so the ones with the cassette and the free wheel, are going to be more tense than the non-drive side spokes. There's a reason that makes perfect sense when somebody who knows the physics behind it explains it to you, but I don't remember what that is. Something about the cranking. It makes sense if someone who knows what we're talking about explains it. But so what you're looking for here is you want the spokes to be not too tight, because if they're too tight and you try to adjust a spoke nipple, you're going to round out the head or snap a spoke. If they're too loose, then, now this would only happen if they were all very loose, the wheel could collapse. Or it could make a lot of noise, be really obnoxious. You could break other spokes if one is not taking its share of the weight distribution, and you could start having to see other spokes break. And you're not going to have the strength properties. Like I said, it could collapse if they're not tight enough. So that's just kind of something you want to be careful of. You can feel them and squeeze them. And I never use a tensionometer. I don't even have one, which is why they're not cheap. But you can kind of like squeeze them together, and you can see I'm able to move them a little bit, but not a lot. These spokes, on a whole, I think might be just a little bit too tight. But we're not going to worry about it until we put it in the truing stand and see if it's true. What comes into play then is if spokes are really tight and you true it, then you want to be loosening the spokes rather than tightening the spokes. Right? It makes sense. So when you true a wheel, what you've got going on is you've got the spokes over here on the right side are pulling the rim to the right, and the spokes over here on the left side are pulling to the left. So if I loosen a spoke that's over here, then the rim is going to relax this way, that part of the rim. If I tighten a spoke over here, then the rim is going to be pulled over this way. Vice versa, if I loosen a right side spoke, it's going to relax to the left. If I tighten the left side spoke, it's going to be pulled to the left. And that's how you true a wheel. You just go around, you have something, some calipers, be relative to the wheel, and you spin it through there, and wherever it touches, you adjust the spoke nipples around there, and it does that. There's even a sign that says it usually does this. And so that's like kind of the idea behind truing a wheel. If you've never done it before, it can take a very long time. It can be extremely tedious and time consuming. Building a wheel especially, that's why I pay people to build wheels for me rather than build them myself. I would rather buy a built wheel. I told you this already earlier, but I would way rather spend $50 extra and buy a wheel that's already built and know how to fix it than build a wheel. I don't ever want to build a wheel. Never will I ever want to build a wheel. It's not something I'm interested in spending my time doing unless somebody pays me a lot of money to do it. But fixing wheels can be kind of fun, because you see wheels that are like really messed up, and you fix them and you bring it back to that figure. It's kind of so let's see, that's that. Okay, so you've got an idea of how the hubs work, right? Got that in your head? You've got an idea. This is why this particular one's really complicated, because there's a lot going on you have to keep in your head at the same time. So before we go into truing a wheel, I'm going to show you how to put together a hub in the cone system. So if you want to come up here, we can do that. So here's what we need. We've got the axle, we've got the bearings, we've got cones, spacer for one side. Usually you will have a spacer. The reason why you're going to have a spacer is because you want the axle to be centered over the hub. Well, you want the wheel to be centered in the bike frame. And in order to do that, because you're going to have a bunch more stuff on this side of the hub than on the other side of the hub, you need a spacer so you can, have what you, because when you crank the wheel down in the bottom, in the dropouts, the inside of the dropouts pressing against the lock ring, which is this right here. And so when you do it on this side, you need to have a spacer to get the lock ring out past the freewheel. Otherwise, you're going to be cranking the rear dropout against the freewheel itself, and it's not going to be able to turn. So you've got to have this spacer. First, you do the cone, then you're going to do the washer, then you're going to do the spacer, which is going to go out like that, and you're going to have the lock nut. And that way, when you put this on here, the lock nut is out there far enough so that the inside of the dropout is pressing against the lock nut rather than the cassette. You see what I'm saying? That makes sense? So, to put this thing together, first thing you're going to do is you're going to put some grease into the cups. You don't really need a lot, you just need enough so that you can get grease on all of the bearings, so there's enough to go around. You don't need to pack it full of grease. It's not, I'm not trying to get a baby in there or anything. They're just bearings. Nothing too exciting. So, get your grease in there. Also, if you have too much, it's going to start coming out, and it's also going to collect grit and nasty from the road, which is going to could cause it to bind up. So, that's probably enough. That's not a whole lot, you can see. There's some in there. So then your next step is you've got to make a decision as to which side of the axle needs to go in and which way. So you can see there are more threads over here than there are over here, and also this doesn't have a spacer, which means we can deduce that this side is going to be the side with the cassette, the freewheel, because you're going to need more stuff right over there. More axle needs to be over there. We're also going to, I guess I'll explain how exactly to compress these and make them so they're not going to move first. So you have the lock nut and the cone, and essentially all you're doing is you're cranking them down against each other. I like to go ahead and take one side and make sure it's good and tight, which it is. Then I'm going to put it all together, screw down the cone, washer, spacer, lock nut, and then rather than trying to tighten the cone and lock nut on one side and try to get it the correct compression at the same time, I'll just have it a little loose and crank those down against each other, and then I'll tighten the two lock nuts against each other. And that way you're moving each individual cone lock nut system towards each other without having to deal with trying to get this other one tight against itself at the same time. You just go ahead and get it tight. Not real tight, but because when you move it, you want it to be able to move it. So you're going to get it pretty snug, and then you're going to tighten the two lock nuts against each other, and that will compress the two cone lock nut systems against each other, and it'll also keep them tight, the two individual units tight against each other. So that's kind of the method I like to use. So I'll go ahead and do that. So again, this side's going to go that way. And usually it's 10 bearings on each side, sometimes it's 9, so maybe we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8. So there's 18. So it looks like we're going to have 9 bearings. There's different sizes of bearings. I kind of feel like the best way to get bearings in the one side is to put the axle down in there so the bearings don't fall through the center of the hub. And then Just kind of. Now, if we had smaller bearings, we'd probably have 10 bearings on each side. These are pretty large bearings for hubs. We only have 9. And it'll become obvious how many you need because what you're looking for is you want to fill it up, essentially. You just want to have it be full. And if you look down in there, you can see there's bearings all the way around. No space for more bearings, right? So that's what you're looking for. And then you just push that there. If you keep the axle in the center of the hub, then the bearings won't fall out. And then you can turn it around, and then it's really easy to put the bearings on the other side of it. Because you got that little hole right there. Just drop it in. If you've never done this before, tightening cones can be an extremely tedious, annoying, time-consuming process. Once you get good at it, you get a lot faster. I can do it pretty quick usually. But also, if you use the method that I just described to you, where you tighten the two lock nut cone systems against each other first, and then tighten the two systems together, it tends to be a lot easier. When you tighten them down, you want to do little tiny adjustments, not big ones, because if you get it too tight, then you have to loosen up one of the lock nut cone systems so you can back it off a bit more, and then tighten it up again, and then tighten it down. It can be really sometimes. But if you're careful and you're patient, and you take your time, you can get it right the first time, and then it takes a couple of minutes rather than 25. So you can feel, if you just grab the axle and lift it up and try to wiggle the axle, that's too loose. We got play in the system. If I tighten this down a little more, that's actually pretty good. So turn it and also twist it, yeah. And you'll feel it's tight in there, there's no play, and it's turning pretty freely. So, then we're going to do the washer, we're going to do the spacer, and we're going to do the lock. Some hubs are really easy to do, and some hubs are really, really difficult. I guess I don't really know why that is, but I know that some hubs, I crank down the lock nut cone system against itself, and then it's like the compression is perfect. Like, I don't even have to do anything, I just lock it down. On some hubs, it takes me a long time. So, again, go ahead and feel how that is. That's pretty good. Go ahead and take the whole hub. So that's kind of what we're looking for. If it's slightly loose, that's acceptable. If it's slightly too tight, that's acceptable, but you don't want it too tight, right? Ideally, you get it perfect, but that doesn't happen all the time. So this is called a cone wrench. It's specifically designed for a cone. As you can see, the slot that it goes into is too narrow for any proper wrench. And then we're going to take the regular wrench, and it's as simple as turning them against each other. And that's perfect on the first try.